Well, since we have 91 years of history to cover, we probably ought to begin. How is the hearing in the back of the room? Is it okay? Great. Well, I'm told that my live streaming audience is the largest. Why don't we begin? I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Tom Scrivner. Meredith and I have been in part of the life of Christ Church since 1980. It actually began in a modest crisis situation where we needed a third session of marital counseling. We were going to be married in Connecticut. I wasn't going to Connecticut enough times. And so the priest in Connecticut said, well, there's no problem. You do have to have the third session, but use your priest in Milwaukee. I was 31. I had strayed for over a decade. I had no priest in Milwaukee, but my aunt belonged to this church. She introduced us to Father Woodbury. Father Woodbury gave us one of the best counseling sessions ever, and we've been here ever since. I somehow on the Adult Formation Committee, my name appeared on a paper as a presenter where the subject was the history of Christ Church. So that's how it was on the paper, so here I am. I'm pleased to do this. It is an interesting history that starts at the beginning. It starts fast, and it's very interesting. 9 founding families in the worst moments of the early history of the Depression. Their idea was a North Shore church for Sunday school for the children. Immediately following or built off of that was the idea of an active, worshiping Episcopal faith community, Christian formation for all. The original plan was Sunday school, occasional services led by visiting clergy. So the beginning is a clear vision. I think we saw today evidence that the vision present at the beginning is the vision that continues to this day. And if you want to see what a founding family member or members look like, Helen Barnes, Hubert Barnes, one of the 9 founding families. Hubert was active in the parish for 60 years until the 1990s. Helen for 70 years until the early 2000s. It began in March and April of 1931, 91 years ago. It was the worst moments of the Depression. The goal was a Sunday school program. The idea was build a church. The people who put this together really did not have a plan per se, but they had inspiration and they had ideas, and they received incredible beginning support, especially from the Diocesan Young People's Society of the Diocese of Milwaukee. They must have been a fundraising powerhouse in 1931 because they had secured 3 parcels of land across the street where the Masonic Lodge currently is. That was to be the site of the Little White Church. They raised money to buy the land. There was a mortgage on the land. Construction costs were going to be considerable. The young people paid 1/2 of the construction cost, plus the land, with a mortgage for $1,000. The 9 founding families raised $1,500, and the church was built. There was a borrowing of $1,000 left over. But the little white church, which you can see the etching of right here, emerged as the first worship space, seated about 100, small kitchen, 2 small offices, 2 classrooms in the basement. Proving that this would be a faith journey, recall that the original idea was occasional clergy. Within 2 months of the idea of forming Christ Church, the 9 founding families were introduced to Father Day. Father Day was a professor of Old Testament and Hebrew at Nashotah House. Bishop Ivins knew of Christ Church, was supportive of beginning Christ Church in Whitefish Bay, and Bishop Ivins thought that Father Day should become the clergy leader for this young congregation. He was interested in returning to parish life from having taught. He then became the vicar at Christ Church in the summer of 1931, not part of the original plan exactly, but faith takes you where faith takes you, and Father Day became the leader of Christ Church for 24 years. He was selected as the vicar in June of 1931. He was offered a housing allowance, a car allowance. He was told, not promised, told there could be, perhaps, maybe, might be, a salary of $1,500, to which he responded, accepting the call to be the vicar, whatever salary the congregation could afford from time to time will be fine with me. So the congregation was formed as a mission church in the fall of 1931. The congregation was incorporated as a parish in September of 1933. Father Day was there to oversee the growth throughout. In 1935, an additional lot just east of the 3 was purchased for a rectory. A rectory was built for just under $10,000. So that is the rectory and the little white church. The rectory was moved in 1978. It currently resides at 4725 North Oakland in Whitefish Bay. The early years were years of growth and difficulty and challenge and faith. It was not without financial struggles. Apparently, the late 1930s were a time of some wavering about the viability. Growth was good, but the finances were not. Helped probably, or aggravated certainly, by the $1,000 embezzlement of a wayward treasurer. But Father Day in particular, with the congregation's blessing, was always thinking that the little white church would be temporary, that there would be a bigger church, probably a grander church. In his frame of mind, complete in the beauty of holiness was his phrase. And this was the vision that was unveiled in 1940. This is from the cover page of the campaign brochure. You'll notice the steeple didn't make it. Everything else on the left side in particular did make it eventually. The Great Hall, pretty well designed, pretty well conceived. On the far right was intended to be a rectory, not the office wing. From the beginning, the congregation knew that this dream, to be realized, would have to be built in phases. And so this master plan guided the first 4 phases of the construction of the buildings that we have here. The land here was purchased in 1939 or 1940, 4 lots, around $6,000. There were neighbors who were not happy that a church would be their neighbor, so there was litigation on a zoning question. Zoning needed to be changed to permit the space to be used as a church. the church had 6 lawyers and probably 5 law firms lined up. Early on, in true Christ Church fashion, there was a trial. The church succeeded. The lawyers convinced the neighbors not to appeal, and the building begins in 1940. Phase 1, you can see. Phase 2, I'll show you the pictures of in a moment. Phase 3, Phase 4, 1941 to 1956. And I've called Phase 5. Phase 5 was not part of the original plan, but that was, of course, the last work that we most recently did. Father Day wrote, when asking for the support for the capital campaign in 1940, "We are building for generations to come, for children and our children's children. We are building a house in which to worship God." And then he wrote, "In Christ Church, we have never recognized a dividing line between the spiritual and the material." There were obstacles to the building of this property, the litigation, the zoning litigation being one, the winds of war in 1940 being another, no bank loans that the church could get being a third. Nonetheless, forward we go. In 1941, the construction begins. The construction is completed in December of 1941. The cost is around $50,000, 50% borrowed through a bond issuance, 50% raised from the congregation. The building, poignantly, was blessed on December 14th, 1941. It had to be quite the day. The Sunday following Pearl Harbor, and the picture of the parade, if you will, is probably the group that had gone to the Cornerstone, which is in the back, blessed the space, and then proceeded to the church. You can see what was constructed in 1941. 2/3 of the church worship space, a small sacristy, a couple of offices. World War II was a time of growth for Christ Church, interestingly. 74 members of the parish served, 2 were killed. In 1945, Christ Church was ready to embark on Phase 2. There was a problem. There were obstacles for Phase 2. This is what Phase 2 became. The church, while it was thriving, approved the building of Phase 2 on August 8th, 1945, 2 days following the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, 1 day before the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and I think 7 days before victory over Japan, or in Japan, was declared, and the end of World War II came. $25,000 was raised for this. The project was going to be just under 50. There would be a mortgage. Materials, building materials, however, were not readily available in the immediate aftermath of World War II. There was a stretch of time of a polio epidemic which prohibited public meetings. So the project that was to begin in 1945 began in 1948 and was completed in 1949. And this project consisted of some building behind the church, so the sacristy area, an office space, and the beginning of the horseshoe. So the space here, the open space, is basically the classrooms in the basement, but the Great Hall, not constructed, but Christian formation moved from across the street to the new church. Things were moving fast, so that in 1951 and 1952, a further project was done, which was mostly the garden vestibule area, the movement of the choir to the second floor and the awaiting of phase 4. Phase 4 was 1953, 1954. $135,000 was raised from the parish to build the phase 4 and finish the construction of the master plan. This was the Great Hall, the kitchen, the office wing, the basement under the office wing, also separately the columbarium. Construction began in April of 1955. The first community tragedy in the life and history of Christ Church followed that fall. Father Day, who was set to retire in 1957, was crossing Lake Drive and was hit by a car and killed and died on October 29th, 1955. Planner that he was, Christ Church had hired an associate rector earlier in 1955, the same year, not knowing what the unexpected would bring, but realizing that planning sets the path for successfully dealing with the unexpected. Father Day had his successor hired before he died. So Father Boley became the second rector of Christ Church in 1955. He served until 1969, when the second tragedy that affected the community occurred. This was a car accident in Jamaica where Father Boley's wife, Lucille, was killed in 1968. In England? Martha Prince, by the way, I will introduce to you. You know her, but she's my fact checker. She was my inspiration for this, and her knowledge goes back firsthand to 1954. When Father Day died, there was this message written in the Messenger of October of that year. Like Moses, Father Day was allowed to see the promised land, but not dwell therein. But we know who led us here, and he will remain in our hearts forever. This is what I call phase 5, but this was the Good Shepherd campaign that built the elevator, the Good Shepherd room, improved the sound system in the church, had hearing improvements for the church, and relocated the choir, redid the youth room, and was lots of fun, which we'll talk about shortly. When you start thinking about the foundation of Christ Church, the vision is clearly part of it. The history of the buildings are a rich part of it. The founding families are an integral part of it. 7 rectors in 91 years, 9 assistant or associate rectors in 91 years, 9 curates, 7 deacons. In the 1940s and the 1950s, Christ Church was a powerhouse of leading young men into the priesthood. 11 were raised up from Christ Church to the priesthood in the 1940s and the 1950s. 3 perpetual deacons, 1 bishop. We have had over 25 music leaders. This is choir masters, organists, children's choir leader, bell choir. We have had senior wardens. I picked this out as a symbol of the lay participation and the commitment to this church that has always come from the laity. There are many other ways of measuring this, but since 1983 to the present time, there have been 40 former and present senior wardens, of which 37 are still living, and of which 26 are still in the congregation. So there has always been this wealth of experience and commitment and dedication available to the church for whatever, if you will, for whatever was needed. The diocesan leaders, at various times, we have had, I think we had a string of 3 treasurers. We've had 2 chancellors, 1 assistant chancellor, 2 church officers, and more. This is a picture of the second rector on your right, and Bob Evans, the 4th rector, on the left. And I would say this picture captures the essence of what they brought to the church: joy, meaning, leadership, growth. There are many things that make up the foundation of a church. You'll note that we took some liberties with the title of the hymn, with the title of the program. But it is really the foundation of faith that is the engine of all that has happened, that marks the richest part of the history of the church. In the early days, under Father Day's leadership, daily Eucharist services. Sunday services in the little white church quickly required 3 services, 8, 9, and 11, the major service being 11. In the 50s, in the 60s, the growth was so enormous that there were double Sunday schools. 1 Sunday school at 9, a second Sunday school at 11, and it was hard to keep up with everything. The garden service was one of the kinds of services that has been chosen to be used over the years. It was the early 1970s when the first garden service was held. The picture that Seth was alluding to with the bell bottoms is the picture of a garden service from 1973. There have been home Eucharists, Great Hall Eucharists, instructed Eucharists, lay Eucharistic ministers, weekday services, evening prayer, the prayer services for peace on Wednesday during World War II, the healing service on Friday that has been in place for many years, children's formation programming, adult formation programming, Bible study groups, prayer groups, pastoral care team. This is where the work of the Lord has been done by the people of Christ Church. And I believe that is Peggy Day teaching in probably the Undercroft space. And then the God Loves Us, that is the children. That is the children. Here's more. Choir in 2008. Jenny Gettle leading and rehearsing the children's choir in 1989. So other elements of the faith formation that have drawn people in over the years and have marked the substance and excellence of the program in the choir: bell choir, children's choir, instrumentalists, vocalists. The guilds, there are many, too many to name. The Flower Guild became its own entity from the Altar Guild in 1954. There was a Guild of the Christ Child for young mothers in the 1960s. The Bethel Bible Series, Curcio, Journeys program, Education for Ministry, musicals that were amazing. That's a picture of Noah's Flood from 1991. An extravaganza of the First Order that took everything. This was the parents, this was the children, this was the musicians, this was everybody to pull this production off. The musical leadership was incredible. Theology by the pint, small groups, live streaming most recently. We had a history for many years of seminarians coming from the Nashotah House. All of this is part of the firm foundation of faith at work at Christ Church. I thought I would give you a few firsts. You might think that Christ Church is the first Episcopal congregation in Whitefish Bay. That would not be correct. From 1895 to 1902, the Episcopal Church planted a parish called St. Clement's. St. Clement's did not succeed. St. Clement's was located where the Methodist Church currently is located, and the diocese sold the St. Clement's land to the Methodists and basically waited for another day to have a parish in Whitefish Bay. So I think we have to say the second first would be that Christ Church is the first Episcopal congregation to succeed and to take root in Whitefish Bay. The picture to the left is red marble pillars that we can't see but are still there, covered, and these would be toward the front of the worship space. It's not clear why in the 1956 renovation and rework and expansion they were covered over. It's possible the red marble was not available anymore. It is possible that there was a design change that simplified things. This is a really interesting first. Christ Church, Whitefish Bay. This is not the first or the only Christ Church, Whitefish Bay. In the 1950s, late 1950s in particular, Father Boley, who was very interested and powerful and desiring of the church to become active, reaching out to the larger community, was part of a support program in Japan called KEEP, and I think it's the Kyoto Education Experiment Project. Christ Church funded the building of a chapel in Japan that was called Christ Church, Whitefish Bay, Japan. Interestingly, a first for Christ Church was October 31st of 1965. No mortgage for the first time in the history of the church, which meant that the property could be consecrated, which it was. First female elected to the vestry, 1970. First female senior warden, Jean Birch, 1984. First female priest ordained in the diocese, Sue Clark, late 1980s. First female priest at Christ Church in a staff position, Barbara Williamson, in 1992. And Mitzi Roy was the first female to head the standing committee in 2006. You don't have a church like this without the talent that some of the activities I've shown required, the time that people were willing to give to the parish. But this has also been a church that has received the gift of treasure repeatedly, amazingly, remarkably over the years. The stained glass windows were part of the master plan that Father Day had in mind. There are, by my count, 83 windows in the church, 83 stained glass windows in the church. All were donated. The first was installed in 1946. The last was installed in 1959. And gifts were given to celebrate, to remember, to appreciate, to count blessings, all the right reasons. 1952, an Aeolian organ was given to the church, which replaced something that we'll come back to, let's say. The altar, the current altar, was given when out of the memorial gifts at the time of Father Day's gift. The reredos, the carving behind the altar, was given in 1956 anonymously. The garden, there's an incredible green garden that was given in 1964 in memory of a parishioner by all of the North Shore Friends of Dorothy Shea, and it was a botanical statement. The endowment for Christ Church was formed in 1982, a gift of $135,000 from the Glantz family, coupled with $100,000 that were accumulated memorial gifts. The endowment was set up very wisely to promote outreach activities primarily. The assets today are just under $800,000 for the endowment. 65% of the income that comes from the endowment or that can be given in a year goes to outreach. When a capital campaign was held in 2007, a decision was made to tithe from the capital campaign to the endowment 10%. There was a bricks and mortar capital campaign to spruce the place up and remove some of the prayer that was needed to maintain the boiler. 1997 was the organ, the installation of the current organ, about a $380,000 project, 190 gifts to make that happen. The Heritage Campaign is the one that ties to outreach through the endowment. The Heritage Campaign was new roof, new windows, new kitchen primarily. $950,000 was raised on that one. The Good Shepherd Campaign, 2017. The pledges were $2.5 million, 250 gifts, 40 at least from outside the congregation to former members, to family of former clergy, to people who knew the church, for whom the church was important, although they couldn't be here any longer. The corpus is the picture. Vestments have been donated countless times over the years. They are amazing and beautiful. The chapel altar was built by the men in the 1930s. The Good Shepherd wall hanging, Sonia Pavlik. Is responsible for that. I would say the Good Shepherd wall hanging sort of stands guard publicly because it's lighted at night and the world can see that there is a caring community, a watch for their well-being. Reaching out. As I indicated, the 1950s and the 1960s is where it really began. KEEP was the project to support educational programming in Japan. Refugee resettlement, Cuba in the 1960s. Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia in the 1970s. Christ Church was a major player with Camp Webb, a diocesan camp that existed in the life of the church for about 30 years. So this was money, board membership, time, and campers. St. John's Home has been the recipient of some major gifts from Christ Church over the years. $100,000, nope, $40,000 over 5 years in the late 1970s to move St. John's from Cass Street to the original building on Prospect. The Nashotah House over the years has been a recipient of excellent support from Christ Church, $100,000 paid out by the end of 1973, and another $30,000 commitment in 1983. We've had relationships with parishes that were formed, St. Martin's and Brown Deer in 1959. Both Christ Church money and Christ Church people seeded the beginning of St. Martin's. St. Andrew's, we had a long-term relationship with. We've had All Peoples, a long-term relationship with them. Youth trips, that's the picture. Nashotah House, I've mentioned. Sojourner Truth, our next generation. We founded the Next Generation, Christ Church men in the early 1990s who wanted a tutoring program, founded our Next Generation. Kids Club, that's the picture. Merity is in the picture. Community Preschool has been here since 1971. I've talked a little bit about the endowment. Our commitment to Neighborhood House goes back to the beginning, which was 1945. Reaching out, Gifts of Hope, Haiti Project, The Gathering, Rescue Mission. These are, that's an all-people's dinner, and Sam Lovern and his grandmother doing sandwich bags. There's Isaiah Dietrich and Maggie Dietrich some years ago, sandwich bags, and Kent Lovern, I don't know what he's doing, but he's looking timeless. It wouldn't be the same if we didn't have some fun along the way. That builds a foundation as well. So there have been Christ Church suppers forever. There had to be in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s fundraising events forever. Church picnics, Camp Webb weekends, Camp Minikani weekends in the early 1990s. St. Nicholas, Boar's Head dinner, 5-cent breakfast in the 40s or 50s, 5 cents for bacon, 5 cents for toast, pay the total. Seder suppers, a group called the Elderberries, Mummers Play, Lessons and Carols, the esteemed Donkey, the Noah's Flood productions, 1968 and 1991, Father Fisher's piano concerts, of which there were a number over the course of the years. The Brotherhood of St. Andrews was a men's group here that was very active in the community. We've had fairs and Christmas pageants, Noah's Flood, Willette. We took advantage of our son David's involvement in the production, and there he is with Allison at our house getting ready for the Christmas pageant. And Faithful Fun includes the root beer floats for 20 years, Riverboat Ramblers, St. John's Ball, the Feast of February, the Feast of 20 whatever, auctions, rummage sales, garden sales, fall picnics, a cookbook, couples club, and you could name many others I know. This was in the lower left, this was a Final Four feast party. My advice to you, that's Fran Lyle with her Kansas gear. If you want to place a bet on the Final Four this year, talk to Fran Lyle first. We had a President's Day feast here at the church, so I'm Abraham Lincoln, sort of. Merity is Barbara Bush.
Bob Wilson is Hillary Clinton. Bruce Wilson is Bill Clinton. The Schleys are George Washington and Jackie Kennedy.
And yes, we did have fun. So that brings us to the future. I think this is a rich history. I believe that the vision continues intact, vibrant, and as much of a guide to what we should be doing today as it always has been. We have inspired an effective clergy. The people are here. We've been blessed with resources. We're innovative, adaptive, and creative in the faith formation, as all of the different iterations of faith formation activities would show. And I do believe that we are involved and part of a caring and giving community of service and hope. It's not always been this way. There have been different times when things were not as they are today. 20 years ago, if I went through this list, I would not be able to go through the list as enthusiastically or as positively as I just did. But this is where I think we are. So with that, the pictures of the stained glass windows, by the way, are Jim Trainer's. Jim gave a remarkable program last January that's in the archives on the theology of the stained glass windows at Christ Church. So this is your chance. You're part of the history. Pardon? No, I won't lose it. So any comments or questions? Yeah, Ira. And yeah, we got to do the microphone thing.
We've got 18 people right now online, so they have to hear a mic to hear you at all.
Two questions. One, being our original church being a Wisconsin church, you didn't say there was a bathroom in the church. Was there plumbing?
There had to be.
There isn't in there wasn't in some churches. The church that you go to all summer didn't
That
have
is true.
plumbing.
I think this was suburban Milwaukee in 1941.
Okay.
There had to have been,
Okay.
31 and 41. There had
We
to
probably
be.
wouldn't have gone to church if there wasn't a.
I'm going to declare from the fact that there was no note saying there was no bathroom,
Yeah.
that we did have bathrooms in both.
My second question is, it's just checking out an urban legend from Christchurch. Are we really allowed to park in Sendik's parking lot because the building was there?
Well, as a former owner of that parking lot, in the back at least, I do not believe there is anything legally binding. I think, though, there is self-interest for us.
We shop there.
Yes, there is self-interest for Sendik's. There was, so here's legend, there was speculation that perhaps Sendik's wanted to limit our ability to park there. And this came to Father Fisher's attention, and he talked to the Sendik's people, and he said, well, I could deliver a sermon on this subject if you think that would be helpful. That might be the last word. That might be the last word on the parking lot. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, it would not. Yeah. No, I got it right here. It's right here. Right there.
For your children, the future one more.
No. Oh, okay. Yeah. And while we're in this section, here's one I missed. Well, I'm going to do this first, then I'm going to go back. This was a Denton Jones picture that I think captures the essence of what the Good Shepherd campaign was all about. Yeah, Pam.
And it's beautiful at times when I mean, when our community walks up and down or drives down the street, it says a lot.
So I should go back?
To the original drawing
Yeah.
plan, that whole thing.
I bet Tom would make this public,
Yeah, sure.
so
Yes,
you could have it.
I have permission from my co-producer, David Scrivner, who was the preparer of all of the graphics. I prepared the text, but David prepared the graphics. And we have his permission, I think. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Bruce.
Hey.
One should not forget that there's a nice little publication by Jack and Martha Prince about the history. I think it captures the first 75 years.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. First of all, I need to recognize Martha Prince again and her husband Jack, because on the occasion of the 75th anniversary, they really worked hard because they wrote a book about the history of Christ Church. And we have some copies available, and we'd love for you to take one if it's of interest to you at the end of the program today. But it's a spectacular history, and it made my job a lot easier. There's a really interesting book called And One Was a Priest about Father Day that was written by Jesse or J. Lou Hall, which is a terrific tribute to Father Day and a very important accounting of the early history of the church. In 1956, Frederick Salmond, who was a prominent lawyer in town and one of the members of the founding families, wrote the 25th history, and that is also an excellent account of what happened between 1931 and 1956 to explain what Christ Church had become from the firm foundation that started. Frederick Salmond, interestingly, it was his words that said the original idea or vision for the church was Sunday school for the children and occasional visiting clergy. in 2 months, there was a vicar. Talk about faith at work. Frederick Salmon's comment was, man proposes, God disposes. So from the original vision to Father Day in 2 months, there we are. Other comments or questions? Yeah.
You go, Jack.
Yeah.
There's a lot of planning that's gone in early till today. What is the plan for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Because it seems like it's very well organized. There must be some kind of plan going forward.
Well, that's an interesting question that I can easily defer to others. As far as I could get was to just hold out hope that the future was bright. The exact next steps, well, they're probably going to be determined by all of us. But you are correct that there's an element of planning and there's an element of prudence and there was an element of restraint when it wasn't necessarily easy to exercise those attributes. And they are part of the church and they are part of the foundation. Therefore, whatever plan that comes next, hopefully will be guided by that.
I think hospitality has been really a central theme, and I think this new project, Phase 5, that many of us are having flashbacks with Tom up there at the mic, because we've had enough new people. You may or may not know that Tom chaired Phase 5. Merity chaired the capital campaign for Phase 5. Some folks just arrived. Many people arrived after we dedicated that space. But along those lines of hospitality, we did it primarily to allow elevator access to all of the floors of this facility. But we also built a gathering space. And I don't know if you recognized it or heard it, but as things were pin drop quiet, as you all were engaged in here, there's a lot of great, fantastic kid noise, like right out there. And before we had that second space, do you remember we had to actually shut down all the fun with coffee hour? We had to tell people, you got to make a choice. You either like go home or you join the forum, because there was no other gathering space, if you remember. And so that kind of consistent theme of hospitality and that intersection between the spiritual and the material that the original Father Day talked about was very much on display, contiguous to us and to Tom's presentation. So thank you. This has been fantastic. Are there other comments or questions?
Just a couple of things.
Oh, please, yeah.
Just take a look at these statistics. The records are mixed in terms of do they exist or do they not? Are they findable or are they not? But you can see steady growth through the 30s, steady growth through the 40s, incredible growth from the 50s. We don't have a number for the 60s, but it had to be bigger, had to be a greater number than the 50s. This is a story of many people finding their way to a faith community that began with a vision and went that far, that fast. I thought the number of services that are done at Christ Church now was of some interest. So the 2019 numbers come from the parochial report. So these must be accurate. But this shows a worshiping community alive and well and at work. There are a few shout outs before we split. David gets another shout out for being the video producer. Jim Traynor, the pictures of the stained glass windows. Jack and Martha Prince again. Frederick Salmons for the 25th book. J. Lou Hall, Jesse Hall for the Father Day book. Emily Vale Pfaff for the picture of the barns. Steve Boley, one of Father Boley's children, knew about this and was very interested in it. Mary Jones has organized our archives. They are not perfect, but they are quite rich and very interesting. So much of what I've found and much of what I've presented is in the archives that Mary organized a few years ago. So I thought maybe the thing to do to conclude would be to take Father Day's prayer, which I am told was frequently prayed time after time over 24 years. Almighty and everlasting God, who dost govern all things in heaven and earth, mercifully hear the supplications of us, thy servants, and grant to this parish all things that are needful for its spiritual welfare. A church complete in the beauty of holiness, a home for our pastor, an organ to accompany thy praises, workers to labor in thy harvest, teachers to spread thy glory amongst our children, adequate income for the support and extension of thy work. Strengthen and increase the faithful, visit and relieve the sick, turn and soften the wicked, rouse the careless, recover the fallen, restore the penitent, remove all hindrances to the advancement of thy truth. Bring us all to be of one heart and mind within the fold of thy holy church, to the honor and glory of thy name. Amen.
There we go.